Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful day to govern. I hope everybody had a lovely summer holiday. It is, in fact, Thursday, August 17th, 2023 at 9:30, and I'm calling this meeting to order. As we gather this morning, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of Council and our community that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. We would like to thank the Algonquin people and express our respect and support for their rich history, and we are extremely grateful for their many and continued displays of friendship. We also thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Connie, has roll call been taken?
Yes, Chair, roll call has been taken and we have quorum.
Thank you. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? I see none. May I have an adoption of the minutes of the previous meeting held on June 15th, 2023? Moved by the member from Killoughby, Hegarty and Richard, seconded by the member from North Algona, Wilberforce. Were there any errors or omissions? I see none. All in favor? Thank you. And now at this time, we have Mr. Byron Tan, the Manager of Municipal Finance, Watson and Associates, to overview the background on development charges in Ontario and provide findings from the study. Welcome, Mr. Tan.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As I've been introduced, my name is Byron Tan, Manager at Watson and Associates. We've been retained by the county to undertake the development charge background study. And today we're here, here to provide you with an overview of the study process to date, some of the draft findings that we've been working with staff over the last 10 months, and really to receive any questions at all with respect to the process, the the timelines, or even the numbers that will be presented before you today. With that being said, would I have sharing rights, or will my presentation be loaded?
Tina?
You're able to share.
Okay. And please let me know when you can see my screen.
We're good.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Okay, so let me just move on here. So as I said, we'll go through a bit of an overview of the development charge study process for the county. We'll talk about the timelines of the study process. I'll provide members of the committee overview of the legislative changes to the Development Charge Act to date, as well as how it's a brief overview of its history. And then we'll talk about the methodology and the process that was utilized for this development charge study. We'll talk about certain exemptions that needs to be provided through the Development Charge Act. Unfortunately, although the development charges are meant to recover for growth-related costs, it is not 100% recovery. There are a number of exemptions that must be adhered to, over the course of the life of the bylaws. And then as well, we have prepared a couple of scenarios for consideration of not only the committee, but of the county. This is through work with staff in determining, the best course of action as to how to present the charges and the recoveries of the noted capital that were provided for consideration. And then lastly, we have prepared a survey of the rates, not only within the counties in Ontario, but how it would look like for all of the local municipalities should county charge be implemented. And again, based on the two different scenarios that you'll be presented today. And then we'll just talk about the next steps. And I have questions at the end. If there are any questions, feel free to ask, but we do have the opportunity to ask at the very end of the segment as well. So just an overview, for those that are unfamiliar, development charges are a revenue tool that is used to recover growth-related capital costs associated with residential and non-residential growth within a municipality, or in your case, throughout the county. The capital cost would be in addition to what you would normally require a developer or development to provide as part of a subdivision agreement. So typically with those type of agreements, The developer would construct the internal roads. Maybe there's water and sewer mains, sidewalks, street lights, stormwater ponds, etc. Really, those items would be constructed on your behalf at their charge, and then you would assume it at a later date. So development charges are meant to be the costs that are in capital that are above those standards and requirements. And lastly, municipalities are empowered to impose these charges through the DCA, the Development Charge Act. It's not mandatory. As you know, you do not currently have a development charge right now. But if you so wish to implement one, you do have the ability to do so through the Development Charge Act. So just an overview of the study process. My colleague Gary Scanlon presented to the County Council back on April 20th of last year, and that provided an overview of development charges as a whole, the different nuances that could be considered, calculations, etc. Fast forward after that presentation, the county did retain our services to undertake a development charge background study. So within the months of August to May of this year, we undertook meetings with staff, looking at all of the different facets of capital that needs to be incorporated or included for recovery for the development charge bylaw. We also developed a growth forecast, that's taking a look at the growth within the county to 2036 based on your current official plans. And then we undertook all the calculations and policy reviews, which takes us to today's meeting. So today we are, I'm presenting at the Finance Committee meeting to receive for you to receive this presentation. And then 2 weeks from now, the expectation is to present at council, at a council workshop to provide a similar presentation to provide the overview of the DC and the process and the draft rates. Subsequent to these meetings, we're more than happy to receive any comments or any type of revisions that council or the committee wish to include or identify as part of the development charge study, at which point in time we have the opportunity to revise the calculations and policies based on your feedback. And then we can come back in the fall to provide a final report for staff for their final review prior to posting onto your website and publishing. And then really after, based on the Development Charge Act, you do have a requirement of a 60-day minimum notice from the release of the report to the passage of the bylaw, or the consideration of the bylaw, I should say. So anytime after the release of the report, we must wait a minimum of 60 days prior to council's consideration. So now we're just going to step through a bit of the legislative changes to the Development Charge Act. For those of you that may be familiar, development charges, they're not new. They have been around for, almost half a century now. It started off as lot levies under the Planning Act back in the mid-50s. Fast forward to 1989, that was the first iteration of the Development Charge Act. And that really set the stage as to what municipalities could include as part of growth-related costs. Now, given that was the first iteration of the act itself as a standalone document, aside from the Planning Act, in 1997, the province went through a number of changes and revisions based on how the act and the bylaws were performing over that decade. And therefore, what we are working with today under the current legislation is based on the 1997 Act. And that provided a lot of different definitions, a lot of exemptions that have to be adhered to, and then subsequent to that, there's been a number of revisions through 7 different bills. I'll state the bills here because the names are a bit lengthy, but Bill 73 that was implemented back in January 2016, and what that predominantly did was just introduce a number of definitions that actually also implemented the 60-day mandatory requirements of publishing the bylaw before publishing the document, I should say, prior to the consideration of the bylaw. And then as well, they also included other services, such as waste diversion, but also made sure that they had additional reporting requirements that the treasurer must adhere to, on an annual basis. And then with bills 108, 138, 197, 213, and then 109 and 23, as you see on the screen, they're a little bit more recent. They occurred over the last, 3 to 4 years, and I actually have them summarized on the following page. So with the recent changes to the DC legislation, as I said, the first one was Bill 108. This was introduced back in 2009 and then implemented in January 1st, 2020. This provided a timing of payment provision for development charges. So essentially, if you are a rental housing or institutional development, you are allowed to pay your development charges over 6 installments, so really over 5 years. Additionally, nonprofit housing were allowed to pay their development charges over 21 payments or over 20 years. So that, while that allowed for, spurring on these type of developments, it did create a little bit of, an administrative impact when it came to administering these multi-year agreements. However, with that being said, you are allowed to include interest rates with respect to those annualized payments. So then that way, you are keeping up somewhat with inflation, although it is still just based on the interests that you have determined at the time. Additionally, from Bill 108, you must adhere to you must provide a DC rate freeze for any site plan or zoning bylaw amendment applications. So essentially, if I was a developer coming in with a complete site plan application, whatever the rates are at the time, the rates must be frozen for a maximum of 2 years. And I'm allowed to pull a building permit anytime throughout that time horizon and not have to pay any other added development charges other than what was agreed upon at that time of the rate freeze. However, that is still subject to interest rates. They implemented this because from one bylaw to the other, because development charge bylaws do expire, there could be a large change in the quantum of the charge. So if you did have a rate freeze, let's say in year 4, year 5 of your bylaw, once you update it and your bylaw dollars change, then at least the developer knows exactly what they were paying without having that unknown of what that new rate will be when they actually pull the building permit. So that was from Bill 108. Bill 138, what that did was actually remove the installment payments for commercial and industrial. So historically, that was part of Bill 108 initially, but that was removed. So it was a minor change from that bill. And then Bill 197, the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act, that was one of the larger changes to revise the Development Charge Act, because it actually laid the foundation as to what eligible services could be considered for DCs. Historically, the way the original Development Charge Act was written, it would note what services were excluded. So slight wording changes. However, when you state things that are excluded versus things that are included, it does change the dynamic a bit as to what you could potentially include as part of development charges. Excuse me. They created this idea of classes of service. So all that means is you can create a pool of services based on the list of 20 eligible services that are part of the Development Charge Act now. So I'll give you an example. Public Works is not considered a DC eligible service because it is not one of the listed 20. However, you can create a class of service called Public Works if it's made up of other services, such as your roads and related. So in this case, services related to a highway, water services, wastewater services, maybe parks and recreation. So if you pool those other services, which essentially what's Public Works services anyways, then you can create that class of service even though it's not part of the 20. I know it's a little bit confusing, but I'll show you in a couple of slides the list of the eligible services. And then they removed this mandatory 10% deduction. All that was historically in the 1997 Act, for most of the soft services, so your parks and rec, library, et cetera, once you get to the calculations, even though it's a project that is 100% recoverable, at the end of the day, we must reduce it by 10% to allow municipalities to have a share of contribution from non-DC sources. They removed that requirement. So now if a project is deemed 100%, we no longer have to do this extra 10% deduction at the end of the day. And then finally, the 10-year planning horizon was removed. So historically, again, with these softer services, so your non-roads, non-water, non-wastewater, et cetera, we were limited to a 10-year planning horizon. However, now that planning horizon has been removed, all except for transit. Transit is the only one that's still restricted to a 10-year planning horizon. Now, for most municipalities, they still stick to the 10-year planning horizon for most of their soft services, primarily because your capital budgets and your master plans really look at that time horizon anyways when it comes to identifying capital. So, not too many municipalities deviate from this time horizon, although you now have the ability to do so if you have master plans that go out, say, to 2041, 2051, et cetera. Bill 213, so that was actually a change not under the Development Charge Act, but it was under the College and Universities Act, where any development on university lands that receives operating funding from upper levels of government is exempt from paying development charges. So, typically universities and colleges and universities were exempt for most DCs anyways, but now this just made sure that it was mandatory exempt and set in stone. Bill 109, there were some minor changes to the rules that the annual treasurer statements must provide. Again, this is something that's more on the administrative side and doesn't really affect the development charge in the calculations standpoint. So we just work with treasurers to make sure that you're conforming with these treasurer statements. And then the big one that everyone must be familiar with is Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act. And there's actually a couple of slides that are just dedicated to that bill. So just an overview of the Development Charge Act changes from Bill 23. So the province introduced the bill in October 25th, 2022. And it was a very expeditious process. Within a month and 3 days, it was passed. And, so as you can see here on November 28, 2022, Bill 23, came into effect and received royal assent. The bill made a number of changes to about 10 pieces of legislation, most notably the Development Charge Act and Planning Act. But what we're going to talk about today, obviously, is the main impacts to the Development Charge Act. And at the end of the day, the number of changes that came from Bill 23 does negatively impact a municipality's ability to collect revenues to fund growth-related capital expenditures. I know there's a lot of words here, so I'll just kind of step through. If we start at the bottom, the ones highlighted in the green box, these are additional exemptions that were introduced through Bill 23 that are now currently in effect, regardless of whether a municipality passes a DC bylaw, a new DC bylaw or not. If you do have a development charge bylaw, these items are in effect. So if you have any inclusionary zoning units, so these are really your affordable housing units, perhaps under transit nodes, because that's typically where you would have inclusionary zoned areas with bylaws to it. Those would be exempt from having to pay a development charge. Similarly, nonprofit housing. If you recall from the previous slide, I talk about nonprofit housing having the ability to pay their development charges over 21 payments or 20 years. So those type of units are now exempt under the Development Charge Act. So any other installments that would have been payable post November 28, those are no longer eligible. Therefore, it is now exempt. And then we now have these additional residential unit exemptions. The Development Charge Act does provide for additional residential unit exemptions. However, they just made it clear as to the type of additional dwelling units that could be included on a property, as well as the additional dwelling units that could also be located not only attached to the primary residence, but maybe attached to a accessory use, maybe a unit on top of a garage, a detached garage per se. So those provisions were already in place as part of the Development Charge Act. Bill 23 just kind of firmed it up and added some extra words to it. And then the items on the top part of this slide are additional DC exemptions that have not come into place yet, but they have been passed, but they're not going to be enforced until the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing provides the bulletin to actually define these items. So while they are in effect, they're not enforced because we don't have the background information to it. So the first one here is the affordable rental units. So any units where the rent is no more than 80% of the average market rent, again, which will be future defined by this bulletin, would be exempt from having to pay a development charge. Similarly, with affordable owned units, if that unit is priced where it's no more than 80% of the average purchase price, then it will also be exempt, from development charges. Now, while these items have not been are not enforced yet, there is some concern as to how these will be implemented, because as you know, say being a county, you do have different urban nodes, different areas. You have a mix of rural, urban, semi-urban, municipalities. What will that 80% average look like? Would it be on a county-wide basis? Would it be on a municipal, a lower tier municipal basis? And even then, within a lower tier municipality, you have different areas. So you may have one area that's up and coming where the prices are, fairly, above market value. And then maybe you'll have some areas where, it doesn't have the same type of servicing, and therefore the average purchase price is perhaps less than the 80%. So does that mean, just because depending on the area now, it's always going to be exempt? Again, these are things that, we have asked the province through a number of letters, even through our partners with the MFOA. So this is something that we are monitoring to see how it's going to come to play once it is implemented. And then lastly on this list here is attainable units. Again, the definition is a little bit unclear, but they do state that it excludes affordable units and rental units, and it's to be sold to a person who is at arm's length. So it's a little bit unclear on this definition. So hopefully, again, once the bulletins do get released, that these will be explained in a little bit more detail and clarity to be able to determine what these types are. And then lastly, although there are a lot of exemptions here, municipalities would be allowed to enter into an agreement with the developers to ensure that these units remain affordable or attainable over the next 25 years. Again, that may be an administrative impact because now you have to ensure that you're monitoring all of these type of units that receive this exemption. And then if they do breach that agreement where they resell the unit for profit or above the market value, above that 80% market value, how do you basically retroactively charge a development charge to get the monies back from that unit that's no longer meeting that affordable or attainable criteria? So there's a lot there to digest. Again, we're monitoring it right now. We would include that as part of your draft bylaw. However, if it's not defined, it is still not in place, as I mentioned. A couple of other items that are being reduced through Bill 23. So namely is a discount with respect to rental housing. So there is a criteria that, the unit must consist of, all the units within a building must be considered for rental. And within that rental housing, you do get a discount on the DC based on the number of bedrooms. So if you're one bedroom or a studio, you get a 15% discount on the development charge. If you're a 2-bedroom, you get a 20% discount. And then if you're 3 bedrooms or larger, you get a 25% discount on the development charge that's being implemented. And then additionally, with additional revenue reductions, the province removed the ability for housing to be considered as an eligible DC service. So some municipalities may have social housing initiatives or other municipal housing initiatives that we were including as part of development charges for recovery. That's now been removed from the ability of a municipality to be able to, gain those revenues to pay for those type of services. Additionally, there's been some capital cost amendments where they've removed the ability to pay for studies So these are more so your transportation master plans, official plans, any broad studies that would really oversee, growth within the municipality. So studies have now been removed. And land, I would put an asterisk on land. While certain lands have been removed, they have not been defined yet. So we are still unclear as to which services where land is no longer eligible. But for now, since it's not put in place yet, if you did have any projects that required the purchase of land, let's say you had to build a public works yard and you need to purchase land as well, we could still include that as part of the development charge study calculations up until the point where the province does deem, which services that land is no longer eligible for. The largest one here as well is this mandatory phase-in of the DCs. So what this means is if any municipality passes a DC bylaw, anything past January 1st, 2022, you must implement a mandatory phase-in over a 5-year period. So for example, if you had a charge that you were implementing, say that was $10,000, the first year that you can implement is only $8,000. And then in year 2, you can go up to 8,500, 9,000, so on and so forth until you're in year 5 where you get to 100%. Now, development charges are allowed to be indexed every year, through inflation, through the non-residential building construction price index. I know that's a mouthful, but that is an index that StatsCan provides that follows really tender prices within Ontario and within Canada for the most part. So that index is used to escalate your DC on an annual basis so that it keeps up with inflation as your projects also increase, from one year to the other, just with tender price increases or any other inflationary factors that may be affecting your projects. So while you are going to say from 80 to 85, it's 85% plus whatever you're indexing in that year. And then finally, for you, it probably doesn't matter, but the historical level of service. So when we do the calculations for the development charges, historically, we had to look at what you provided in the past, which was over a 10-year horizon. They made a change to make it look at it over a 15-year horizon. Now, again, for the county, it may not matter because you don't have development charges right now. But for others, it may impact the amount that they could collect because depending on what occurred in that previous 5 years, it may sway the development charge maximums that they could implement up or down, depending on whether they're a fast growth municipality or if they've invested heavily into assets, in the prior years. And I'll show you an example later on of what I mean by that. There are some administrative changes from Bill 23 to the DCA. Historically, when I had mentioned under Bill 108, where you can implement an interest rate policy, to charge for those annual installment payments or the rate freeze for site plan and zoning bylaw applications. Now the province has said that there is a maximum interest rate that you can implement, and that is the average prime rate of essentially the large banks plus 1%. So we are always looking at the interest rates from the prior quarter. So right now we're in the month of August, so the adjustment period would have been July. However, the way the act is structured, even though we're in August right now, the rates that we would have to implement as part of the maximum interest rate would be the rates that were effective as of April 15th, which is the prior quarter. So it's always 1 quarter delayed, but this is now the maximum interest rates that we can implement for these type of charges. With respect to the second bullet, there is a requirement to allocate 60% of any development charge revenues a municipality receives in their reserve funds for water, wastewater, and services related to a highway, which is really your roads and related. Now, the key word here is allocate. So you don't have to spend the money, but you have to essentially earmark the money. So, if you were to receive, say, $100,000 in DC revenues this year, then at least $60,000 must be earmarked, say, to one of your road projects That, and it doesn't have to be, one that's next year. Maybe it's earmarked for one that's coming up in 2027. As long as you're allocating the monies to certain projects, then you've satisfied this requirement of the Act. And then lastly, the DC bylaw. They used to be 5 years. Now the expiry is allowed to extend up to 10 years. So with that being said, now we'll just get into the overview of the development charges and how it's formulated and, what it means for the county. Just this graphic, I just like to show you that, development charges, really are the revenue tool to be able to gather information, from other documents in order to provide a justification to the charge that you're trying to implement to pay for growth-related works. So typically, through the DC, we take a look at your official plan to develop the growth forecast. So that lets us know, the pockets of development, which municipality is growing, what is the quantum of the numbers of housing and population and employment we're growing, and up to what time frame. And then from that, we take a look at your master plans and capital budgets, which again stem from, your official plan purpose and targets. And any capital that's identified through these master plans and your capital budgets, again, go feed into the capital program that we calculate, which then, as you can see on the bottom here, develops our development charge calculations, as well as the study and your bylaw. Now, with the methodology, I know we've summarized here in 6 steps, but the Development Charge Act has over 80 clauses and over hundreds of subclauses. So this truly is a summarized version of it. But at the outset, the main items to consider as part of the calculations are to, first off, identify the amount, type, and location of growth. So this determines basically our demographic work, the planning work. We've worked closely with your planning staff to be able to disseminate, the information not only from the county's official plan, but also how the other municipalities within the lower tier are growing as well. And then we take a look at, now that we know the growth, we take a look at the servicing needs to accommodate that growth. So in this case, if you need to provide, certain road works, then this is the item that would identify, the amount of roads you need in order to service the type of growth you're experiencing. And then number 3, identify capital costs to provide services to meet these needs. Sounds very similar to number 2, but number 2 says essentially we need roads to provide to provide the community in order to service the growth. Number 3 breaks it down even further and says, what roads do you need to identify growth? So now these are actually your projects. So again, just because you're going down, say, one county road, but then all of a sudden, you want to, nix that idea and actually go, maybe a couple of blocks to the east and build north-south on that road. At the end of the day, you're still providing the need to accommodate growth. Your capital just may have changed slightly, but you're still providing the same service. So that 2 and 3 are somewhat interchangeable, but again, one is more the broader service that you're providing. The second is the actual project on a specific level. And then from there, once we determine those projects, we do have a number of deductions that we have to adhere to. If you do have any grants, subsidies, or maybe contributions, whether it's from the development community or from your member municipalities, we do have to deduct those from the costs that are being put forth. There is this benefit to existing development that must be adhered to. So let's say if you do have a project that is, say, upgrading a road from one base to the other. So you're going from gravel, let's say, to asphalt. So you're providing a little bit more capacity. So because there's subsequent developments that'll be utilizing that road. Well, if you're doing a full reconstruction and upgrade, the first portion where it was to a standard that it was gravel and because there was already a road there, that really is your benefit to existing. So a subset of that costs was already benefiting the existing community. So really the only portion that would benefit, growth would be that upgrade in order to allow for, larger vehicular traffic, faster movement per hour, etc. But again, recognizing that that road also does have benefits to the existing community, we would make that adjustment and deduct those percentages. Additionally, there is this amount in excess of the service standard. So as I mentioned earlier, prior to implementing the charges, we identified the capital program, but we do have to take a look at what you provided historically, because what you provided historically can be no higher than so what you want to provide in the future can be no higher than the average level of service you provided, I guess, now over the last 15 years. So there is that minor change. And again, I'll show you an example in a couple of slides. But we do have to do these service standard calculations, which sets the ceiling as to the maximum amount that you can recover from development charges. And then DC reserve funds, again, you don't have one right now, but if you did move, let's say, from this bylaw to a next bylaw, if there were any reserve fund monies, from development charges, then we would have to deduct those from the capital costs that are being recovered, because you already have those monies in the bank to be able to pay for portions of the capital program. We then take that information and we receive a net cost, which then we allocate between residential and non-residential benefit. So most capital items, I mean, there is a benefit to not only the residents, but also to businesses as well. So we do make that allocation based on the growth forecast identified in step 1. And then from there, once we have the 2 different buckets, then we just divide it by the growth between those categories. So that is essentially the development charge methodology in a nutshell. I do have this graphic here. I'll leave it for members of the committee to consider and to examine after the fact. But essentially, it just summarizes the prior slide, but in a little bit more detail of the flow chart and at what section do we make these adjustments, make these identifications, etc. With respect to the calculations, again, as we talked, just to summarize. We look at the cost of infrastructure required to accommodate growth. That essentially is our numerator. And then we divide that by the growth, between the different segments. So between the residential, which typically we look at it on a population basis, which then translates to units. And those units could be, single detached dwellings, townhomes, apartments, etc. And then we also divide the non-residential costs divided by the future non-residential developments, which essentially is your traditional institutional, commercial, industrial. And we look at that more so on a cost per square foot. So if you're seeing on the right-hand side, essentially one divided by the other gets you your DC for res, and then your DC for non-res, which again is typically based on a per square foot basis. The number of DC eligible services that have now been implemented as part of Bill 197 are shown on the screen here. As you can see, it starts from water, wastewater, storm, road services related to highway, which is really your roads. And actually, that's the service that we are considering for the county's DC bylaw. We also have, other services such as fire, ambulance, library, etc. Again, most of these are services that are provided through your lower tier municipalities. And as I mentioned earlier, through Bill 23, housing services are no longer eligible. Just to provide a brief overview of the growth forecast. So when we were working, again, with the county planners and as well with our demographics team at the office, we took a look at the potential growth within the county over a 13-year time horizon. So going from 2023 to 2036. So it is anticipated that there are just under 10,100 people that potentially would be the growth within the county. And that translates to about just under 5,800 residential units. Again, that's a mix of your singles, multiples, and apartments. And then with respect to the non-residential development, it is estimated that about 2.54 million square feet of non-residential development would occur over the same time period. And again, that could be in the form of industrial, commercial, or institutional. Now, with that being said, now that we've established, again, the growth forecast, now we go into the determination of the charge. So prior to looking at the capital, we must do these service standard calculations. So as again, the service standards, they provide a ceiling as to the level of the charge that could be imposed. It is based on the average 15 years now, again, as amended by Bill 23, and it takes a look at quality and quantity. So you'll see this in the moment where we need to take a look at the inventory of assets, and then we assign a replacement cost to them to provide an all-in value. This value, when divided by the people that are located within the county, gives us a per capita standard, and that per capita standard is what determines how much we can include within the development charge calculations. Now, the only time that this calculation is not required is when we're looking at water, wastewater, stormwater, or transit. They are the only services that do not require this type of analysis. So in looking at your roads and public works, capital needs, we did end up having to do these service standard worksheets. So what you're seeing on the screen here, and I apologize if it's a little bit small, hopefully members of the committee can see this. This is a sample of your service standard worksheet that you will see as part of the background study. So what we're seeing here is on the left-hand side, this is a list of your different road segment assets. Again, we worked with your county staff to be able to determine all of the different kilometers and the inventory that is provided within the county. So you can see there's a number of different designations, from your rural to urban, freeways, arterials, collectors, etc. With that being said, we take a look at the level of inventory over the last 15 years. And for the most part, you've had 816 kilometers of roads. There was a point, I believe, in 2014 where you've added, a couple of kilometers so that you moved up to 818. So we must do this level of inventory over the last 15 years. And then on the very right-hand side, you'll see a value per kilometer. So this is, again, based on today's value of what it's estimated to be if you had to construct these type of roads essentially from scratch. So if you had to pay for the land with assuming with the set right of way, and then put in the base and then the blacktop, maybe a portion of the boulevard, these are the assumed costs on a per kilometer basis. We take that information, the per kilometer cost, and multiply it by all of the different kilometers for each road segment. And what you'll see on this page, and again, I truly apologize on the size. I know there's a lot of information here, so hopefully you can see it, is we take that value per kilometer, multiply it by the number of kilometers in each year in each segment to give us a total replacement cost. So as you can see here, starting in 2008, the value of the replacement of your assets at that time, based on 2023, would be $1.15 billion for your road assets. And then adding those 2 extra kilometers, fast forwarded now to 2022, is about $1.15 billion. So again, just adding, additional like $4 million, to the inventory capital. We take that information, that 1.4 to 1.5 billion, and divide it by the population in each and every year. So the population within the county of Renfrew, it started off as 108,000 people, and then we've now moved up to 114,000. So you can see at the bottom, that gives us a per capita amount of, say, 10,621. So that means, for every person, you've invested $10,000 essentially per person towards your road program. Now, if you don't build anything, but your population is increasing, as you can see, that per capita standard actually starts going down. It started off at 10,621, dropping to 612, 610, so on and so forth. So really, at that moment, until you start building, it will keep going down, which does affect your service standard calculations. Now, we take that information and average it over the last 15 years. So from 2008 to 2022, the average of this per capita standard is $10,404. So you can see your highest was 10,600, the lowest was 10,100, but on average 10.4. We then take that information and multiply it by your growth forecast. So if you recall a couple of slides before, over the next 13 years, we're assuming population growth of about 10,093 people. So we take that $10,000 and multiply it by 10,093. And what we're seeing here is an eligible DC amount of $105 million. So what that means is if you have any capital programs for roads, we can collect up to $105 million and still be within that development charge ceiling. I know there's a mouthful there. I'd like to pause for questions. Otherwise, I could continue and keep going. With the rest of the capital.
Thank you so much. We actually have your presentation, so everybody can refer to their own laptops here.
Okay.
But I didn't want to interrupt you. At this time, are there any questions? A member from Alveston Bromley, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Tan. All kinds of them, and I'm going to keep it just to this most recent slide. So as I'm looking over the years 2008 through 2022, but for those added 2 kilometers, these numbers are static. If there were a development charges bylaw in the county of Renfrew, are those individual numbers as we are moving forward, are they subject to inflationary pressures, i.e. of what the value is, or is that value remain static on those in situ, in this instance, roadways?
Through the chair, a great question. I believe I understand the question. So just taking a look at the value per se on the per kilometer basis, that's just the value for 2023. It is subject to inflation or to whatever your whatever your cost is at the time. So, say for example, you do this, say in 2025, 2026, if you want to do another update to the study, these values again are just at the point in time for today. They are not, it would be reassessed during those years that you do undertake another study. If you're talking about the actual value of the quantities of the roads in terms of kilometers, my understanding is we now have a capital program that would potentially add to this 818. However, that would now be captured in subsequent periods. As you can see in this service standard, we're only looking at 2008 to 2022. So if you're doing any road projects, let's say in 2023, 2024, 2025, it won't show up on this particular page. However, if you were to update your study, it resets your 15-year time horizon, say from 2011 to 2026, rather than 2008 to 2022. So you would see that escalation. But for this information that you're seeing on the screen, this is a snapshot of what you have today.
Supplementary, member from Alveston Bromley.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Mr. Tan. I'm not sure, perhaps I was not clear. So what I'm looking at on this page is the value of the roadway in 2008. The total was 1.148 million. In 2013, it was 1.148 million. Then there were a couple of kilometers added. It became 1.152. And it remains at 1.152 through 2022. So that then when you're doing your per capita standard, of course, from 2008 to 2022, we had population growth. So the per capita standard is actually going to naturally decrease if you're keeping a static value across the value of the roadways. And that's where I'm kind of confused on how you are figuring this out, because if we are simply using today's date and retroactively applying it to all of those 15 years, then we might as well just use this year, would we not?
So I understand the question. I apologize. It was meant on this slide through the chair. When we're looking at development charges, we have to look at it from the valuation as of the year of the study. So since we are looking at it in 2023 dollars, we're valuing your road assets in today's dollars. So what we're trying to demonstrate on this slide is just the value of the asset based on the quantities that you had in the prior slide. So since you've had the exact same quantity of roads, say from 2008 to 2013, what does that represent in 2023 dollars? So all it is just the value in 2023 dollars multiplied by the the quantities, so the number of kilometers in those respective years. Because if we start looking at, let's say 2008 was, again, in 2008 dollars, maybe that value is lower, then the per capita is lower. We would still have to escalate it so that we're looking at a common denominator. And then we can average it into that $10,404 per capita, because we can't average numbers across different years if they don't have the same value.
Did you have another? Okay.
Thank you, and I don't mean to belabor this to hold up the presentation, but I'm presuming that is on the initial bylaw, because as we are moving forward, then our per capita standard is naturally going to decline. Average per capita standard is naturally going to decline if we are using a static value, but seeing our population increase, which would seem to skew the per capita standard below what our additional builds would be. If we were to expand, say, our rural freeway by 3 kilometers, then we're going to be adding that capital asset, but then all of our existing capital for perhaps the next expansion, it seems to me it should be also reflective of probably an increasing per capita, at the very least almost a static allocation per capita, rather than what this is showing is it was per capita 10,600 in 2008, and then it's 10,100 in 2022. So it seems to me that it would be undervaluing what we would likely have to incur for future expansion.
And my confusion with this table was that we have assumed more road, especially expanding with transportation or with bike lanes, and but there's got to be a heftier asset there, Lee. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's more for us to repair, rehabilitate, etc. That's the road I was going down. Okay. Are there any other questions? All right. We are kind of getting late in the morning here. Can we almost not wrap it up? I know that you've got several more slides, but if you could take us to what is pertinent to the County of Renfrew, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Nope. Happy to do so, Madam Chair. So just again, I'll go through these slides briefly then. With respect to capital costs, now that we've established these service standards, again, we can include a number of items based on the capital cost definitions from the Act. We can improve land, acquire land, although, as I mentioned, land right now based on Bill 23, it is still allowed, although that could change in the future. We can acquire, lease, and improve buildings, facilities, equipment and rolling stock, and then any of the lease with the above. And then, as I said, we do have to reduce this by any grants and subsidies that you do provide. And you can also include costs that may be incurred by others on your behalf. So if let's say you have a neighboring municipality that's doing work for you, and you have a capital obligation to that, you could include those as well as part of the capital recoveries. In terms of the limitations, we can't include parkland acquisitions. We can't include any vehicles or equipment less than 7 years useful life. And any computer equipment that's not integral to the delivery of the service cannot be included. And we talked about the other two that's noted on the orange. In terms of the capital program for the county, we do have the summary that has been provided by staff. I believe a full listing was circulated, to members, council and the committee over the last year. So this just provides a higher level. So with respect to the roads itself, we have about $54.5 million worth of roads capital that we're including for recovery. And then on the public works side, with respect to facilities, fleet, and equipment, we have about $1.76 million identified. With respect to the deductions, of the road program, we assume that about $3.15 million worth of it is growth related. However, it won't benefit the population within this next 13 years. So therefore, we've pushed it off as post period. While it is still growth related, it won't be recovered as part of the calculations today. And then there's also about $18.7 million that's identified as benefit to existing. So these are truly your replacement portions of these upgrades that won't benefit growth. And it's truly for the benefit of the existing community. And then we have another contribution that was identified to the tune of $748,000, which gives us a grand total for the potential DC recovery of about $33,672,000. As I mentioned, we have to separate this between residential and non-residential development. So that's a 74-26 split based on your growth forecasts. And these numbers are provided as part of your calculations. Just wanted to highlight that in addition to the development charge calculations, we are providing you with a local service policy. So under the Development Charge Act, we are adhering to the fact that there are certain items that cannot be required from developers unless it is stated directly within your DC study or within a local service policy. So a local service policy really is meant to capture any capital that you require a subdivision to create and develop, essentially, on at their own costs, where you would assume eventually. So this may include, again, your local roads, streetlight sidewalks, bike paths, any park requirements, water, wastewater, etc. So we do include this as a appendix to the report, and we've been working with staff to develop this this document. With respect to the development charges, again, there are a number of mandatory exemptions that you cannot charge for. So, upper and lower tier governments and school boards, you cannot charge them a DC if they decide to, create a building. Industrial buildings are allowed to expand up to 50% without having to pay a DC. Although we do draw the line in the sand so that it's a one-time expansion credit rather than something in perpetuity. And then we talked about all of these other exemptions in the prior slides. In addition, council could decide to provide for any discretionary exemptions above and beyond the mandatory ones. So, if you would like, you could include exemptions with respect to a class or a type of service. So a class, say being industrial, or a type, say being places of worship or churches, or even bona fide farms. So you could exempt those from paying DCs if you'd like. You may phase in over time, but the Bill 23 already mandates that. So if you want to phase in the charge any more than what's required, you are allowed to do so. And then there are redevelopment credits as well, where if a house were to burn down or get demolished, they should be allowed to rebuild their house over a set period of time, say 5 years, without having to pay a DC. And then, as I said, there are common discretionary exemptions that other municipalities do consider. It could be places of worship, farms, industrial, maybe downtowns, certain CIP areas, hospitals, etc. So now we get into the DC scenarios for the county as requested. Through working with staff, we have calculated 2 different scenarios. There's the countywide DC and then a corridor-specific DC. So, if you recall the calculations that were provided earlier, we do have about $30 million of capital that we are trying to recover as part of the development charges. So with respect to scenario 1, that capital program would be recovered on a countywide basis. So any residential or non-residential new developments that are constructed within the county would pay towards this charge. So that way there are no differences between municipalities. Everyone pays. The second scenario is more on a corridor area specific. And what we've done working with staff is determine the area to which the capital projects relate to, and took a look at, what neighboring municipalities would benefit more so with respect to those capital projects. So upon examination of the capital listing, we deemed that the county municipalities really located along the Trans-Canada Highway, so Highway 417, would be included as part of this corridor area-specific DC because a good chunk of the capital works were located in these areas. As you can see here, going from south to north, the corridor municipalities are listed on the right-hand side. You got Arnprior, McNabb-Braeside, Renfrew, Porden, Whitewater Region, Laurentian Valley, Petawawa, Laurentian Hills, and Deep River. The capital would be considered on an area-specific basis. So what this means is only growth within these 9 municipalities would pay a county DC. With that being said, we did have to make then a further deduction to recognize that of that $50+ million worth of capital works, potentially 5% of that could be deducted because there is a potential benefit for any of the growth that may occur within the non-corridor municipalities that may utilize these assets as well. However, if the county chooses the scenario, that 5% deduction, in addition to any other deductions you provide, would have to be funded from taxes, rates, or other non-DC sources. And as I stated, only the developments within these corridor municipalities would pay under this scenario. So really the punchline here that I believe everyone is looking at is now the rate comparison between the two. With respect with that, the potential capital projects that were provided, if we're looking at a county-wide charge, a single detached home would pay roughly $4,760 per unit. A townhome, which is truly your multiples, is about $3,907. And then you got your apartments, with 2 bedrooms or more, paying $2,883. 1 bedrooms or less, $2,170. And then you have this category called special care, special dwelling. So really, these are your retirement homes, your Chartwells, where they have residential units. It's more on a per bed or per person basis. So that's reflective of the charge of $1,913. And then on the non-residential side, we're looking at $3.45 per square foot for any of the developments within that county-wide scenario. In terms of the corridor-specific scenario for those 9 municipalities, again, the charge is higher because now we're dividing it by a lower subset as opposed to the whole county-wide. But the charge is now $5,647 on the corridor area specific, $4,636 for townhomes and other multiples. Again, $3,420 for the apartments that are greater than 2+, $2,575 on the small apartments, $2,270 for those those specialized retirement type homes, Chartwell homes. And then $3.55 on the non-residential per square foot. And then finally, we did take a look at a survey.
Mr. Tan, if I may, we are getting really late here, and we do have all of this information in our packages. If you could take us to next steps, because I understand that you are coming back to County Council, and I would really like to make sure that there are no additional questions today. Thank you.
Yep. So again, the survey, as you said, Madam Chair, these are all for council, for members of committee to review. And then as well, just go here. And then with respect to next steps, again, receiving your feedback today, we are attending the council workshop on August 30th. And then from there, any feedback or any changes to the report, we're happy to do so through the month of September. And then finalize the report, hopefully by the fall, in time for council and staff's consideration prior to the consideration of the bylaw.
Thank you. I'll open it up. Are there any questions today, or do you want to leave them until County Council? I think my only concern is that of the 20, and I realize that one was stricken, so the 19 DC eligible, only 7 of them are services provided by the County of Renfrew. We don't have fire, we don't have policing, We don't have water and wastewater. We don't have libraries. And I think coming back to county council, we have to make sure that people understand that it sounds great on paper, but when you really dig into what we supply at the county, we're looking at a very different scenario. So that's one thing that I would ask, that when you come back to county council, that you make it clear that those things are not, like on one of your slides it said, materials for libraries. Well, we have libraries at our local tiers, but not the upper tier. So that's just one comment from me. Is there anything further? Well, thank you very much, and we will see you on the 30th.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Excellent, thank you. Does anybody want 5 minutes, or do you want to plow ahead? Do you want? Nobody's even looking at me. You want 5? Okay. Welcome back, everyone, and we will turn it over to Mr. Kelly with his administration report. And everybody got the addendum? Yes? Excellent. Take it away, Craig.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, one and all. So my report starts on page 2, as the Chair mentioned. So number 1, as previously announced, and I love what was written in here, so I have to read this one because this is great. Of course, Rose Gruntz is retiring and provided her notice effective August 31st. Rose joined us on February 16th, 1998, and has over 25 years of service. The sentence that gets me is, during her years of service, Rose has successfully trained CAOs and clerks Norm Lemke, Jim Hutton, and Paul Morrow, and currently is working on her work in progress, Craig Kelly, who would now be in a position to train her replacement. So, once again, congratulations to Rose on your retirement, and of course at County Council we will celebrate her retirement as well.
Excellent, and I thought maybe Rose actually wrote that paragraph.
I didn't actually read it before it went out because I was on vacation. I came back on Friday. And actually, it's wrong. I never did train Norm Lemke. He was here long before I was. So we will correct that for County Council.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure he still had a bit of training when Rose got on board, so that's fine.
Yes, and congratulations, Rose, and I'm sure that the 30th will be filled with lots of memories and thank yous.
I have a number of times told our CAO that it should only be 5 minutes at the end of the meeting.
Yeah, well. Item number 2 is the addition to this group here, and of course a new face to this room. We'd like to welcome Gwen Dombrowski, who hails from the township of Madawaska Valley. We're happy to have Gwen join us as the seat filler for Rose when she retires, so welcome to Gwen. I have worked with Gwen in the past and can attest to her professionalism and the amount of knowledge that she will bring to this chamber, so we're looking forward to working with Gwen. So congratulations.
Welcome, Gwen. I assume because this was the last committee, you've never met all the county councillors.
Not Mr. Doncaster, I don't believe.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I don't think there's a few.
But welcome.
Yeah. Item number 3 is a piece of correspondence from the town of Deep River, timely fashioned after a discussion about development charges. So the town of Deep River has suggested or has provided a letter including a matched resolution about granting of an amount equal to an exemption for development charges. So the Deep River and District Hospital is building a new long-term care project. We've talked about this at length. They're adding an additional 96 beds to the long-term care project there. And an appeal has gone out to the municipalities in their region, and ours were included in that list of those wishing to provide a grant in lieu of a donation. Well, I guess that is still a donation. I note currently we do not have a provision for donations, but I leave this for discussion when we come back to that, Chair. Item number 4 is an update on AMO delegations, as all of your committees have been receiving throughout the week. This is a notice on page 3 of all the delegation requests that we did make. And of course on pages 4 and 5 are all the delegations we have been awarded for the Community Services Committee to be aware of, with Minister Michael Parsa to deal with social assistance impacts that we've had, the Minister of Education to talk about additional childcare spaces, Minister Graydon Smith of MNRF to deal with the flood mapping especially in our region, Doug Downey, Minister of Attorney General, to talk about the lack of justice of the peace and the lack of funding that we're receiving because of the decrease in fines. Jill Dunlop, the Minister of Colleges and University, to talk about paramedic schooling. Long-term care, we're going to talk about the CMI index, and the operations are going to talk to the Ministry of Infrastructure about shovel-ready projects and growth-related projects. Here, not on here because it was received after the report went out, was a delegation with the Ministry of Health on mitigation funding and the health unit impacts, or the impacts that will have on the health unit and us moving forward. So of course the AMO starts on Sunday, and a number of us will be there in attendance, and it will be a full conference of meetings for sure. Item number 5 is a notice about the Warden's Golf Tournament taking place on September 21st. The payment and registration information is now online. We encourage everyone that would like to join us to now register. I understand from Mr. Belmore and crew that the donations and sponsorships are coming in quite regularly now, and the numbers of registration are growing. So, of course, this is open to anybody and anyone. Please reach out to your own municipalities to encourage them to join us. The Warden has asked this year that the funds go towards the Winter Games legacy and a new housing and homelessness fund that will be set up to receive these donations. Item number 6 is another great news story, and thank you to Council for allowing this to continue, or at least start, is our new employee recognition program. So on April 26th, you approved the policy, and just a few weeks ago, we joined those 5, 6 members of our staff to award them with these recognition awards that were on behalf of their peers who nominated them. So it's my pleasure to announce these winners to committee and council, that the winners of these awards this time around in this quarter for honesty and integrity were Diane Rance, who is our payroll administrator here, professionalism for Brenda Jolliker, who is now retired. Actually, we gave out the award on the day of her retirement, who is a 25-plus year Ontario's Works agent. The client service orientation to Anne McVeigh, who has worked with us for several years in planning and provided, in this example, exemplary service to a member of the public. Focusing on results was the crew at Bonacher Manor, Julie Mayotte, with the day program at Bonacher Manor, and Stacey Levesque, who is a paramedic. And teamwork was the food service department, at Bonacher Manor. Madeline Butson, Sandra McGarry, Chelsea Blair, and Cheryl Corcoran, who stood out in their work at the Bonacher Manor, of course, delivering healthy food to the residents there. So those are the items for information, Chair, and I'll pause there before I go to the addendum, which is a bylaw.
Excellent, thank you. We'll go back to information item number 1, all about Rose. I know how much you love that, Rose. Information item number 2. Warden, please.
Yes, welcome to Gwen. We tried to throw under the bus yesterday by pitching a difficult procedural question, but Craig stepped up for her, so we'll wait till next month. But welcome. she did seem a little shocked when I said, "Oh, well, let Gwen answer that."
Too soon, Warden, too soon. Number 3, the request from the town of Deep River.
I guess a question to Mr. Foss. Mr. Foss, my impression is, do we still send that home funds for beds from a long-time agreement?
Please.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, yes, we do. We have an agreement with North Renfrew Long-Term Care to support beds that were transferred. I'm going to say it was 20-some years ago, I guess. And the agreement that we have with them is one of 3 particular options, $18.39 per bed per day, or the average of the cost for a per bed cost from Bonacher Manor. Any of our options have a maximum entitlement for an annual basis of $140,000 per year, and typically, other than the COVID years, they receive the full support of $140,000 per year based on our funding formula. So that has been in place for many, many years, and it continues. Thank you.
Warden?
If I might, the supplementary would be, with the increase in beds, that agreement can't increase, so we'll cap it at the maximum of being 140 through, or with whatever the formula is, forever?
And through you, Chair, that agreement, again, was based on 20 beds that were transferred for Bonacher Manor to North Renfrew Long-Term Care. And so that agreement that we have in place to support those beds is directly related to that transfer of our beds, our municipal home beds to North Renfrew. And so it will remain in place and not impacted by any other future agreement.
And if I might, one more supplementary. So the 140,000, is that a direct transfer from the province, or is there municipal dollars in that 140?
Through you, Chair, those are municipal dollars. We cost share that with our separated city of Pembroke. And so in total, it's $140,000, and we split that based on the same percentage that we allocate a cost of running Bonnechere Manor and Miramichi Lodge. So the municipal cost share applies to those homes with the city of Pembroke as well as to the North Renfrew long-term care.
Thank you. And finally, through you, Chair, I guess I would suggest that we have been a fairly staunch supporter of this home in the past with significant investment, and will go forward. Should there be questions about our inability or unwillingness to fund $29,000, I think is the number they've thrown into their request. So thank you. I can't support.
I'm glad you asked the question about provincial dollars. I sort of mistakenly assumed that it was shared by the province. The member from Laurentian Hills, please.
So the North Renfrew long-term care is separate, right? These are 96 brand new beds that will incorporate Four Seasons home. So this is something different, right? They're asking for waiving development charges on a totally brand new facility. Am I not correct there? Okay. So what you're talking about is different than what they're requesting.
Yeah, I was looking at the community investment.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they're two totally different
Yeah.
entities.
No, I understand
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything further? The member from Edmundston Bromley, please.
A couple of points, Madam Chair. Thank you, and I appreciate the conversation and the input from my colleagues. So I've never been actually quite certain. I know that there is Four Seasons and North Renfrew long-term care. One of them is associated with the Deep River Hospital, one is not, and I'm not certain of that. As to the initial questions raised by the warden, even on today's Treasurer's Report, page 28 of today's document, you will see that the cost share is about $95,000 for the county of Renfrew and $46,000 from the city of Pembroke. I had known that these funds were allocated beds that presumably had been part of the Bonnechere Manor, but then got allocated to Deep River, in which Four Seasons, I'm presuming. These new beds are directly from the province and not allocated from some other source. So it's important, I think, that there is that distinction and that bright line be kept clear that these are beds that are county beds that were allocated to Deep River through Four Seasons, whereas now the new beds are directly allocated from the province.
Michael, could you, I don't think I quite understood what you said. So you're saying that instead of adding 20 to Bonnechere Manor, they're taking those 20 and putting them at the Deep River Hospital or the Allied?
So perhaps Mr. Blackmore might be able to add some more clarity, but as Mr. Foss had said, these were beds that were assigned to the county of Renfrew, I believe at the time of the redevelopment of Bonnechere Manor. I cannot say with certainty that they were allocated directly to Bonnechere Manor, but they were county of Renfrew beds that were allocated to Deep River and, as I understand, to the Four Seasons, to North Renfrew. So be absolutely clear. So these beds were assigned to North Renfrew long-term care, and I presumed that they were part of the redevelopment of the manor, but perhaps Mr. Blackmore might be able to shed more light on that.
If you have more info, I know right now this is only an information item, and I'm sure there'll be much discussion at County Council, but yeah, if you could just shed a little light.
Yeah, through you, Chair, to Councillor Donahue, the beds that we're speaking of are indeed directed to North Renfrew long-term care, not Four Seasons. and they are the result of, at the time of redevelopment, 20 beds being set aside for North Renfrew long-term care, not Four Seasons.
Still clear as mud to me. Anything further on? Oh, yep, go ahead, Craig.
Just a matter of procedure. So you wish for this item to forward to County Council for full discussion as well then?
Yes, I think that we need to have a fulsome discussion with all members. Agreed? Yeah, okay, I'm getting a lot of this, so that's good. Okay. Yes, please. Yep. Yep. Moved by the member from Emerson Bromley. No. Nope. Okay. Do I have a mover and seconder to send this to County Council? Emphatically moved by the warden and seconded by the member from Brunel, Lindock, and Raglan. More discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Noted. Thank you. That carries. Thanks. And we will move on to number 4. I have to say, these delegations, it's deja vu all over again. Any yes. Any conversation? All right, and moving on to number 5, the Warden's Golf Tournament. Yep, go ahead, Warden.
Thank you very much. You'll notice that we strayed a little bit from the traditional, and it's nice to reestablish the golf tournament, just to get together with the community and raise some funds and put something back in the community. But we strayed a little bit from the traditional recipients. Homelessness and is a fairly significant problem for our community. I say it's a problem because there's not enough beds and people are definitely needing places to live. So everybody deserves a home. Not everybody needs a house. And so, you know, with the homelessness program, we're hopeful to be able to help in the short term while they find something a little more permanent. And then we wanted to establish the legacy fund for the Ontario Winter Games. Hopefully we should have, by the end of the month, we're still getting invoices for that. And hopefully we'll have a solid number by the end of the month as to where the Ontario Winter Games is and the legacy fund. And we're working on the criteria as well. So this will sort of be a coming out party for it, to announce it and how people can apply for it. So we're working those pieces, but we're still, I think I'm still chasing 4 invoices based on texts and emails that I'm getting. So anyway, we'll try and have it wrapped up soon, but I'm done making promises on that. Thank you. But anyway, the 2 causes are great causes. We're establishing them as important for the county and for our community.
Yes, the Chair of Finance is really looking forward to wrapping up the Winter Games. You know, it's the gift that keeps on giving in my home office. Anything further on the golf tournament? And finally, under information number 6, the Employee Recognition Program. I think this is amazing. And I hope that when we get to that, the comedy evening, that we cite these people. Okay, excellent, good. Yeah, I'm getting a nod from the warden. Glad I didn't overstep, warden. Anything further? Excellent. Then, Craig, if you want to go to our addendum under bylaws.
Thank you, Chair. So item number 7, I'll read the recommendation into the record that the Finance and Administration Committee recommend the County Council adopt a bylaw to appoint a deputy clerk for the County of Renfrew.
Excellent. May I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved by the warden, seconded by the member from Brunel, Lindock, and Raglan. Discussion. All in favor? Excellent. Gwen's like, oh good, one step further. Be really bad for Rose if we got to county council and we voted against it. Rose is like, I don't care. All right. Can I have a mover and seconder for the admin department report as a whole? Moved by the member from Laurentian Hills, seconded by the member from Killoughby and Richards. Anything further? Seeing none, all in favor? And I will turn this over to Mr. Foss for the finance report.
Thank you, Chair. And page 14 begins the report on corporate services. Item number 1, of course, was our delegation today. Byron Tan from Watson and Associates, and of course Byron will attend County Council, not virtually but in person, and provide a very similar presentation to all of County Council. And as Byron outlined, this presentation really stems from Council direction in 2022 to enter into an agreement with Watson to prepare a DC background study and present it to County Council. Item 2, attached as Appendix 1, is the Treasurer's Statement of Remuneration and Expenses paid to County Council as at June the 30th. Item 3, the Treasurer's Report, and again attached as Appendix 2, is the June 30th Treasurer's Report for General Revenue Fund, Bonnechere Manor, Miramichi Lodge, Public Works, and the Renfrew County Housing Corporation. And we are pleased today to have Mr. Daniel Burke, our Finance Manager, who would be happy to answer any questions that committee has on those particular reports. Item 4, Provincial Offences Administration Workload. Chart that we bring before you on a monthly basis, and just highlighting for you the very last row of that chart, the month of July. You'll see we have 654 charges that were received in the month. That trend, if it continued over 12 months, would bring our annual charges to 7,850. One would consider that to be significantly lower than our history. The folks within the Provincial Offences Office are very aware of the fact that the month of August, we are continuing to see very low levels of charges being received. And of course, you can see that this trend has continued since about the month of May. So for 4 months, we have been experiencing this low level of charges. This is one of the items that our chair will be bringing forward next week during AMO when we do have a delegation with the minister or the parliamentary assistant, I believe it is. With the minister. Okay, we've got the minister. So we've got a number of issues that we are raising with respect to provincial offences, but the continued reduction in charges is one of the items that we wish to bring forward. The next item that is also contained within that brief is item number 5, and that really deals with provincial offences backlog. And the first thing that I'll bring your attention to are the number of courts that we originally have scheduled through the Regional Senior Justice of the Peace's office, and the number of courts that we have to cancel, and that is directly related to the lack of Justice of the Peace resources available to us in Eastern Ontario. We had been telling you that roughly 40% of our courts are being canceled. We are at 60% now. Since March, of our total court days have been canceled because of the lack of judicial resources. I'm sure that the chair will highlight that fact at the delegation next week. And what continues to baffle us is the fact that we have gone to a hybrid solution in our courts to ensure that the Justice of the Peace does not physically have to be in the room in order to conduct the affairs of the court, that we have all of the technology in place to allow for not only the Justice of the Peace, but prosecutors and defendants are all able to join those sessions hybrid through the technology that we're using today. And yet we still do not have an adequate number of justices to conduct our court sessions. And so that's certainly an issue that I know will be well spoken to next week. Item number 6, Human Resources Division was very pleased to have welcomed a young lady by the name of Mackenzie Dallaire on a 2-week placement. She came to us through Canadore College. We find this to be an excellent opportunity, not only for the co-op student to work with us and to gain some knowledge and understanding of real-world human resource activities, but we certainly benefit as well by having these college students working with us. They bring an enthusiasm and an excitement to what they're doing as they learn, and that's very infectious. And so we are pursuing for the fall and winter semesters additional co-op opportunities with Cambrian College. Those placements are 7 weeks, allowing us to really benefit not only from their learning and growth opportunities, but we certainly benefit from the work that they're able to assist us with. As well, Lambton College has an HR placement over a 4-month period, and so we are pursuing those as well. And Madam Chair, before I go to resolutions, maybe I would stop there.
Yes, please. Thank you. Under information item number 1, the development charges. Number 2, council remuneration. Warden, did you want number 1? Oh, okay, number 2.
Quick question, and I'm sure the two members here are too polite to bring it up, but I'm a little worried about Councillor Brose and Councillor Donahue. When I look at the remuneration under conventions and stuff like that, and so we're asking, I think they're both nearly up against the wall on conventions, and we're asking them to show up for delegations on a regular basis. So I'm wondering, and I thought I remembered that we had an exemption because of delegation requests. Can you remind me of that, if you don't mind, please?
We do have in our budget, in addition to the council remuneration bylaw, which allows $3,900 per councillor to attend conventions of their choice. We also have a budget line item for delegations, those individuals who are appointed by their committee to attend a conference and speak to a particular issue, either delegations or advocacy. And so if those individuals are identified by their committee to speak to an issue, those dollars that are required for registration and conference attendance and travel, etc., go against the advocacy and delegation line item. And in our budget document, and I guess that would be page 23, advocacy and delegations, I'm just looking for it. It's $30,000 is our budget in total, and to the end of June, we had spent only $320, so there is certainly sufficient room to allow for those activities. Thank you.
Thank you. You're not worried about Brose and Donahue anymore? You're good?
No, they're big boys. No, it struck me when I was going through it, and I thought I remembered the number. I thought the number was 3,500, so I'm a little more relieved it's 39. Thank you.
We'll all have to pay for them to eat at AMO. Okay, number 3, the treasurer's report. Member from Amherst Bromley, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do appreciate the warden's concern. I know I do generate concern often. With respect to, and to keep these, I think I'm keeping them contained to those departments that this committee oversees. So on page 26, I was looking at HR and seeing that at 50% of the year, we're at 75% of the budget expended, and the line items that that kind of made note of were office expense and purchase service. So on office expense, we budgeted $25,000 and have spent on 6 months just over $92,000. On purchase services, budgeted $75,000, and we've spent 86% of that. I'm just wondering if whether it be Mr. Burke or Mr. Black, Mr. Belmore, wish to speak to those.
They're drawing straws.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. That particular issue in human resources relates back to the purchase of a new HRIS system using Municipal Modernization Grant number 2, which has a 65% funded and then 35% unfunded share. So this particular line item would be the 35% municipal share of this year's portion of the HRIS system costs. The remaining share is budgeted to come out of the provision for unallocated funds. We just haven't yet settled on how we want to show that particular item within the human resources budget item, but that is the specific issue there.
Thank you for that, and I'm presuming, because I had spoken with Mr. Davis and I had avowed that I would keep it within this department, I'm assuming that that is likewise on the GIS. I'm seeing a similar situation. Is that correct? Yeah, I think for the public record and those that may not be able to see all the way to the front
The
of the
answer
room,
is you are correct, sir.
thank you for passing that on. And just bear with me as I return. So also on oh, actually, I do apologize. Some of these are within the Councillor Giardini's department. Substantial shortfall in the provincial subsidy for the Ontario Works Program admin line. Is that a calendar issue whereby it has just simply not been received at the time that the June 30th report was prepared?
Through your chair, yes, somewhat of a council, a timing issue. As well, there was an issue with the ministry calculation where they hadn't, we had an adjusted date for the new, I'll say reductions to start. They were originally a mid-year reduction, and then that date was pushed back into November, but our cash flow was never realigned, and we did make the ministry aware of that about last month, so it's since been corrected and should be right on budget for the September statements.
Yes.
Thank you, and I do wonder again, it will not be specific to the same answer, but if it is also a timing. I noticed, and I had to chase it down a little bit, and I know it's confusing because we have both a community services budget, and we also have a Renfrew County Housing Corporation budget, and there's transfers between, and ultimately the bottom line from a municipal perspective is unchanged. But the SSRF funding, there was some received, though it's a little disturbing. Again, I think we've only received about half of what we had anticipated in the first 6 months. But I noted as well that it is showing up as having been received into the Community Services Committee, but has not been transferred as anticipated in the Renfrew County Housing Corporations. Again, is that simply just a calendar item that it had not been allocated to the Renfrew County Housing Corporation?
Through you, Chair, no, that issue is specific to the new build occurring on Lee and Douglas Street. And a bit of a quirk, but the reason it's not flowing through into RCHC is because the building is being built inside the County of Renfrew proper, and then will be transferred over to RCHC. So in terms of the SSRF funding, it's just a match for what we've spent on the building construction so far.
Okay, so if I understand, and I'm absolutely drawing a distinction, this is not Infrastructure Ontario, but it is similar to under construction loan versus the debenture. While it's under construction, it is under construction as the Community Services Committee, but when it is complete, both the building and the funding will be transferred to the Housing Corporation. Okay, thank you. Once again, for those watching, there is a nod in the affirmative.
Yeah, I was
by Mr. Burke.
I was going to translate for Daniel and say, yes, you are correct. All right, anything further on the Treasurer's report? Yes, the member from North Laguna Wilberforce, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and interesting to see that the office supply line is already over budget in this department, or in the human resources. It was also in development and property, and I'm just wondering, it seems like that's a common item, and if there's an explanation for it.
Apparently staplers have really gone up in cost. Do we have an answer for that, or is that something that you could bring to County Council just to let us know? Yeah, okay. They'll bring that back. Because I noticed it, well, I really noticed the other one, but yeah, in DNP as well. That paper, man, it's expensive. All right, anything further on the Treasurer's report? Seeing none, we'll move on to POA. This is the, again, the gift that keeps on giving. Number 6, co-op opportunities. I had a question. Have we considered even delving into high school co-op programs? Mr. Belmore?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have, and that we've actually had high school co-ops here before.
Okay.
There was one that was in DNP last year, working in the marketing for tourism, and it's something we're definitely open to exploring for any students that would be interested.
Because years back, I believe we did have high school, and then it sort of fizzled out. But I know just from my own business that it's an excellent way to suss out, not only for the employer, but for the young person coming up to decide if that's in fact what they want to study or if that's what they want to go into. We've had many co-op students that have come to our shop and said, you know what, auto mechanics just isn't for me. So it's good on both ends. Thank you for that. All right, anything further? Then we will move on to resolutions, please.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 7, non-union salary grid annual adjustment. Perhaps I'll read the recommendation that the Finance and Administration Committee recommends to County Council that the County of Renfrew's non-union salary grid be adjusted annually based on the June 12-month average of the Consumer Price Index for Ontario, and that's all items, as determined by Statistics Canada, and that the adjustment will be effective for pay period number 1 each year, and further, that this adjustment will not be lower than any increase negotiated with any of the union collective agreements, and further, that a revised bylaw number 1 be brought forward to a future session.
Thank you. I'll ask for a mover and seconder to get it on the floor, please. The member from North Algona-Wilberforce, seconded by the warden. Do you want to get just a brief background? I know everybody read the report.
Yeah, well, I guess, for some time, the Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Kelly, and myself have been talking about our approach to dealing with the development of our budget process with respect to non-union staff. And of course, of the 850 or 890 staff working for the County of Renfrew, 211 of those staff are coming to us in the non-union group. So roughly a quarter of our staff are non-union. And on an annual basis, we would typically, during our budget development process, we would bring forward to this committee and to County Council some recommendations, some guidelines with respect to developing the budget. But certainly during these inflationary times, and we have decided to really survey our counterparts in Eastern Ontario, so the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, to really get some sense from them about how they are dealing with COLA changes to the non-union salary grid. By and large, the responses that we have received from EOWC members is that they have a bylaw or a resolution or a policy which directs staff on an annual basis to go through a calculation to determine what should be used as a target for the development of the budget process. And this committee will be well aware of the fact that we as staff really begin in earnest to work on the 2024 budget in September of each year. And we go through a very rigorous process that culminates in presentations to each committee in the month of January, as well as we set aside 2 days for a budget workshop where we have an opportunity to review the budget and the impact of the budget in detail for each of the committees, and then on a consolidated basis for the County of Renfrew. And so we are recommending to you that we use Ontario CPI as being a target, not just a single particular month or a point in time, but actually using the 12-month average prior to the month of June each year as our target, if you will, for developing the budget. and then with the adoption of that budget, then moving forward with changes to bylaw number 1. We picked the month of June as the CPI target simply because, the June statistics are available typically by the end of July, sometimes into early August, and that allows us to take that information and begin developing all of the worksheets for salary calculations for all of the staff working in all of the departments as we move the budget process forward. I've provided for you a chart on page 17, really kind of going through the last 4 years, if you will, the annual Ontario CPI in 2020. That's again the 12 months. That average prior to June of 2020 was 1.16%. In 2021, 1.47%. In 2022, 5.39%. And in 2023, 4.79%. And I have provided also the union agreements that were in place for each of those years that would correspond to the non-union approved increase by council. So for example, just by way of explanation of the chart, in 2021, using the 12-month average CPI, we would have seen 1.16% as being the number that you would be using to develop the budget versus what was actually approved by council at 1.5%. And then we did have a union agreement that increased union salaries by 1.6% in that year. It's no secret that non-union staff are very aware of the fact that for the last 3 years, we've had union agreements that settled in excess or higher than the COLA increase that's been provided to the non-union staff. Our goal always in the development of the budget is to ensure that we treat our non-union staff at least the same as we are our union staff, and we have not done that for the last 3 years. So that particular fact, coupled with the current inflationary environment that we are all find ourselves living in, has prompted Craig and I to really dive into this a little deeper with each of our EOWC comparators. I only have one response from one of our comparators where they receive council guidelines or a council target on an annual basis for non-union staff. All of the other responses, they are using some form of a calculation, and that's predominantly based on CPI with a view to union agreements. And so that is the reason for our proposal this morning. And since it's there, Madam Chair, perhaps I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Comments, questions, concerns? The member from Adamston Bromley, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had reviewed today's agenda prior to today. Yesterday, I had a conversation with Mr. Kelly, and so I inquired as to where I could find the data sheets through Statistics Canada that were utilized in this, and I think that Mr. Kelly did take me to the page, and it broke down and it was specifically to Ontario, all items, and it broke down all of the items that were contained therein, and it gave it for each month, and Mr. Kelly advised that there was a mathematical equation then, that it was simply taking all of those together and then divided by 12. In that conversation, I also showed him where I had searched because I could not make my numbers match what were contained in this report. That in and this, I have the specifics, the report from Stats Can of where to find it, but it actually does give the year over every month throughout the year. So the July 31st has just been reported in mid-August, but what it does do is it provides the comparison of June 2022 to June 2023, or you can go back, and I did, for each of the years that I've been here. So commencing with 2014 through 2015, it compares this year's June to last year's June, and it gives what the change is on that basis. So Statistics Canada is providing us the year-over-year inflation. So it seemed to me, and we had that conversation, I'm not sure, Mr. Kelly, if you had any occasion to discuss with Mr. Foss, but if we already have that number directly from a report, a series of reporting that StatsCan provides, why we wouldn't use that number.
Yeah, Mr. Foss and I have had that, through you, Chair. We've had that discussion. I'll perhaps allow Mr. Foss, it's his data, if we could let him answer that question.
Oh, thank you. The recommendation is to use the 12-month average, which ends in June of each year. June to June, using those statistics, are 13 months. So what we're attempting to do is to capture on an annual basis from July of let's say, the very first period. So the 2020 number ending in June of 2020 would begin in July of 2019. So we're trying to capture a 12-month period that ends in June of each month, and we're taking the average of those months, not 13 months, but 12 months. And so it just makes an awful lot more sense to us to be using a 12-month average. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed the word average before, so I'm glad you clarified that. Supplementary.
Yeah, so I remain somewhat confused because the June number each year is posted in July. I think it's about 2 weeks into each following month that the prior month is reported. So when they report in July of 2022 the June 30th inflation rate, then when they report in July 2023 the June 30th inflation rate, why would that be 13 months rather than 12?
Through you, Chair. Of course, we all know that CPI is actually an index. It's a number. And of course, in 2002, the number was 100. So that's how they set CPI, whether it's for Ontario or Canada or whatever. And so what we are doing is ensuring the utmost in accuracy. So for example, back to my example of June 2020, the CPI inflation rate for Ontario all items was 138.6, and if I go back over June, this is again monthly, the month of July of 2019, it was 138.8. But what we're doing over that 12-month period is we're calculating on a monthly basis, on a per month over the 12 previous months, we're calculating what was the inflation rate over a 12-month period for each one of those months as we lead up to our target month of June. And so if I calculate those 12 months average, those 12 monthly averages from June back to July of 2019, we are seeing, as I mentioned in this report, 1.16% is being the 12 months ending in the month of June for 2020, 2021, 2022, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be our process, and of course, it's our recommendation, so this committee can do with it as they like. But that to us, because we're using monthly reports from Stats Canada, we have all of the information available to us to be able to calculate the 12 months ending in the month of June. Thank you.
Do you want to try and land this plane? I think your question was about
the advantage I would suggest, Madam Chair, to committee is that whether it be the finance department or whether it be any employee, whether it be any counselor, any non-union employer that can go to that series, it's 180000-42, and StatsCan actually provides the annual inflation from June 30th of last year to June 30th of this year. There's no calculation, there's no formula that anyone needs to enter into. They can look at it and say, oh, that's what it was. What I would say is, even looking at the chart here on page 17 of today's report, it suggests that the 12-month average CPI for June of 2022 is 5.39. Using the data series that StatsCan actually publishes, no calculations required. It's actually 7.9. That's what the inflation at June 30th, 2022 over June 30th, 2021 was 7.9, not 5.39. Likewise, when I've done this comparison going all the way back to when I first sat in this room, the numbers fluctuate, but it is posted right on their website. If you have the link, you can go and see it. It's in the most right-hand column, no calculation required. I would suggest that that is probably a much more straightforward process than having to enter into a calculation on determining what it is. Stats Canada tells you what the year-over-year inflation is every month. They provide that. The data that just got posted earlier this week for July 31st likewise has a comparator to July 31st of last year.
So, and I'm picking up what you're putting down, but I think what Jeff is saying is that they take each month and they average it, which is where they got the 5.39. Am I correct? Okay. So that's what they've done. Instead of taking at June 30th, they've taken the average of June to June.
It seems like it, so I recognize that. It seems to be unduly complicated because if we were actually using annually, Stats Canada provides the annual inflation as of December 31st, but because December 31st comes after the budget process has begun, it's problematic. But it seems inordinately complex to have to enter into a calculation to figure out what it is going to be when Stats Canada provides that number comparing this year to last year. When people discuss what was the inflation rate in 2022, it is what Stats Canada says how much that same basket of goods cost over the course of 2022 than it did over the course of 2021. There's not a calculation that's going on.
And of course, thank you, Madam Chair. The reason we're using the average, of course, is that no matter what month you pick, and of course in June 2023 over July of 22, it's 2.46%. And that's certainly reflective of the basket of goods as of June, this particular period versus 12 months prior. What you're missing, though, of course, is the trend that's happened leading up to that one particular month. So whether inflation is lowering or whether inflation is increasing, if you simply select 1 month, you're missing the trend that has taken place for the 12-month period. What we're recommending and we're presenting today is to smooth that out rather than to select the 1 monthly period of June or July or August. Let's take the average of what the inflation rate has been in each of those months leading up to, and again, we're recommending June to allow us to have the information available so that we can begin working and developing all of those budget worksheets to present to the budget workshop. If we were to select, for example, in June of 2022, that 1 month, the inflation rate for June over the previous June was 7.45%, because inflation had been increasing and culminated in that June specific position. But if I take the 12-month average of each of the months leading up to that, it turns out to be this 5.39% because it is capturing the lower inflation a year earlier, but it is also, reflective of the trend as inflation is moving up. If we simply take the 1 month in time, we are capturing only the basket of goods and services as it's being reported to you on that specific month versus that month a year ago. So we're trying to smooth out that trend, whether inflation is increasing or decreasing, by taking the 12-month average. So we have, that wasn't necessarily something that we were thinking of early on, but some of our comparators are doing similar calculations to ensure that for their council, they are not grabbing a moment in time, if you will, but trying to average that out and be more reflective of, are we in an environment where inflation is decreasing? Well, the average is going to pick that up. Or are we in an environment where inflation is increasing? Well, the average is going to pick it up, but it won't be as drastic on either ends of the scale. It would be more representative of the average. You can download this report in seconds from Stats Canada, and by calculating, 1 month over another, it's pretty easy for us to be able to get this information. It's not really difficult or challenging, but that's our recommendation, is that you pick up the average and the trend as opposed to the moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? Member from Edmundston Bromley.
Final comment on this particular discussion, Madam Chair, and I appreciate that. Within the second paragraph of the background on page 16, near the bottom, and this was what prompted me actually to pull up some more data going back a little further. It states our non-union salary grid has not kept pace with inflation. Then actually, if one looks at the chart on page 17, the non-union salary increase in each of 2021 and 22 exceeded what the new formula would have provided. In fact, the non-union approved increase for 2021 was 1.5 versus what the new formula would have provided, which is 1.16. If you look at 2022, the new formula would have provided an increase of 1.47. Council decided on 1.75. So the only year where it's fallen off is actually the current year that we're in. So I'm not so sure that it was not keeping pace with inflation. We are in an inflationary period that we have not seen probably since well, I'm not even sure if the financial meltdown in 2008. In any event, I have stated my piece. It will be up to committee or perhaps council to have a discussion on this at the end. The other thing that I did wish to bring forward, though, I think that certainly at budget time, we had a discussion. Much of our discussion was revolving around some of the budgetary pressures from the changes that were driven by the non-union salary review, the Gallagher report. Now, that was done in, notwithstanding that it says here in 2021, it was in fact in 2022. We first saw it as a draft in March and we approved it in May of 2022, but none of the councillors that have taken up their seats for the first time at the end of 2022 have actually seen that. It might actually be a good idea, since a lot of the discussion that we're having with respect to wages and cost of drivers, it might not be a bad idea that be provided to. It was a confidential document, but perhaps on the password-protected portal or something like that. This is driving quite a bit of our discussions and conversation. I think that if I was a new councillor, I would be quite interested in seeing what the source material is telling us on this.
I think that's probably a good idea, just because of the amount of changeover. All right, and with that, member from Killaloe, Hegarty and Richards, please.
No matter what calculation or formula that you end up with at the end of this year, it's going to be very difficult to match the highest union increases. So comparatively, last year you were at 2.75 for union and non-union was 2.0. If we go ahead at 3.25 based on contract, I'm assuming, right? Then what would the actual non-union to equal the union, what would that percentage be? Like, that's a big stretch. And at some point, do we ever end up being same? Just, I'm not sure if that's a question or just to throw up for conversation.
They're very rarely on par, though, right?
Thank you for the question, through you, Madam Chair. The collective agreement process typically, or our goal typically, is not to have annual negotiations with our various unions. We attempt, if we can, to have a term of at least 2 years, and sometimes it rolls into 3. 1 year with our paramedic service, we had a 4-year collective agreement. And so the challenge, of course, that we have, and that's really why we've highlighted it in the table, is that in the year that we are making decisions around COLA change for our non-union staff, we're already aware of the fact that we have negotiated and we have agreed with our unions to a particular COLA increase. And this chart is at least highlighting the fact that for the last 3 years, your non-union staff have been provided with a COLA change which is less than what we've done for our through our negotiated process with our unions. This fact is not lost on your 211 non-union staff. They have seen this happen for the last 3 years. We are aware of the fact that we've negotiated a 3-year agreement with CUPE in our long-term care settings, and so that agreement in both of your long-term care homes is reflecting a 3.25% increase in wages for those unions. And that's almost 500 individuals. And so I guess we are presenting this at this time to ensure that our non-union staff are well aware of the fact that their leadership group, the senior leadership team, that this fact is not lost on us either. And if we want to continue to attract the best and brightest to our organization in the non-union positions, we are in a very competitive situation, not just with our local municipalities, but with other public sector and private sector employers here in Renfrew County. So our goal is to not lose any further ground, if you will, but at least have a policy in place that protects the hourly rates somewhat against inflation. And again, we're not using a 1 month in time. We're attempting to average that inflationary curve, if you will, to smooth it out as best as we can. But at some point in time, we have to be aware of the fact that our position should be with our non-union staff, and our principle has always been that we should treat our non-union group at least the same as our union group, not less. And so that's the situation we find ourselves in, and that's the position we're trying to protect against. Thank you.
Thank you. Last year we did a level increase right across the board for COLA with our inside people compared to our outside people, and it was, the morale boost was incredible. Like, now they felt on the same page. And I think that's a really good way to go. But having said that, what we did beforehand to determine how much it would cost for those, take for example, those 200 people, how much that would impact our budget by going to the same level as a union employee. And I think that may help us make a decision one way or another.
Thank you for that. And if there's nothing further, I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Noted. All right. Under bylaws, please.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 8 on page 17 is under corporate policies and procedures for human resources. We do have a recommendation. I'll read it out. That the Finance and Administration Committee recommends to County Council the approval of amended corporate policy EO4, vacation, that being effective January the 1st, 2024, and the approval of a new corporate policy J06, return of service incentive program as a pilot project from September the 1st to December the 31st, 2023 for Bonnechere Manor Long-Term Care Home, and further that a bylaw to amend bylaw 6303, being a bylaw to establish human resource corporate policies and procedures for the County of Renfrew, be adopted.
Thank you. I'll ask for a mover and seconder, please. Moved by the member from Killaloe, Haggerty and Richards, seconded by the member from Amherst Bromley. A little bit of background? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item A, the vacation policy, and of course, we've had a vacation policy here at the County of Renfrew for a long, long time. What we are noticing from our recruitment and retention perspective is that when we are somewhat successful in attracting applicants to some of the positions here at the County of Renfrew, one of the factors which is very determinant for our current application pool, if you will, is how we are treating our staff from a vacation policy perspective. And so what we have done, what we've experienced over the last several years, is that when we attract staff that have a little bit of experience, in lots of our positions we are looking for staff, especially at the supervisory or management level, that have 3, 4, 5 years experience in a particular profession, working at a particular level of their organization. And when they apply for our job, because they like our organization, they like our values, they like the services that we deliver, they stumble when it comes to vacation entitlements, because they are leaving organizations where they have an entitlement which is higher than what we are offering. And so what we did is we canvassed a number of municipalities, a number of our comparator municipalities, and the senior leadership team has met a number of times, having a look at the data set and understanding what the environment out there is with our comparators. And it's clear to us that based on our comparators, we are not certainly leading the pack, and that we are somewhat not even average of some of our municipal comparators. Specifically on the start position, so when you come to the County of Renfrew, you're offered a prorated 2-week vacation entitlement in the year that you start work. Very few employers, our comparator employers, are doing that. We then, after the first year, we have a 3-week vacation entitlement, and that you're entitled to move to the 4-week mark at 8 years, and then so on and so forth. And of course, the policy is there for you to have a look at page 49. But we're having a big challenge in the early on part of our vacation entitlement, when you first start and when you actually arrive at that 4-week vacation entitlement period. We have an awful lot of applicants who stumble at that point saying, I've already got 4 weeks vacation. I'm not going to wait 8 years in order to earn that right back again with your organization. And so recruiting wise, we're having a lot of challenges. So our recommendations, you'll see them in the policy documents that are attached beginning on page 49, that instead of a prorated 0.83 days per month, whenever month you're hired, which would be the equivalent of 2 weeks vacation in your first year, that we immediately start people earning 1.25 days per month for the year they're hired, which is equivalent to 3 weeks. We then make it so that 3-week entitlement begins, and at the 5-year mark, instead of the 8-year mark, that you are entitled to move to the next level, which is the 4-week entitlement at 5 years versus 8. We would leave alone then the 25 working day entitlement at 15 years, but then we would progressively add 1 day of vacation entitlement between years 15 and years 19 to arrive at the 30-day entitlement at 20 years instead of 22 years. So what are we trying to do with this? We're trying to make our recruitment efforts a little bit more attractive for new recruits. And then we're attempting to put something in place to keep those recruits here working at the County of Renfrew at the 15-year mark and beyond. And so that's a difficult thing to do in today's employment environment, is to have employees with 15 and 20 years experience. We all benefit greatly for that experience in the municipal world, to have those employees who have been around and seen those things for a long period of time. And so that's our goal, is to make our offer very attractive with respect to our competitors, as well as to keep those employees beyond that 15-year mark and to make that vacation entitlement competitive as well. So, Madam Chair, maybe that's the first one, and maybe I'll stop there before I move into the incentive policy.
Member from Killaloe, Haggerty, and Richards, please.
Was there ever any, thank you, Chair. Was there ever any consideration to, instead of 15 years, 12 years?
Go ahead.
Thank you for the question, and we certainly, we attempted to, again, have a look at where our comparators are. And perhaps I'll just ask our HR manager just to talk to you a little bit about the averages that we saw and when each of those milestones to trigger an additional week of entitlement took place, and which was the basis for the policy that were developed and presented today. So.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. So we surveyed 13 other upper tier municipalities in Eastern Ontario. There was practically no one giving 2 weeks vacation. There was actually only one other municipality like us giving 2 weeks vacation at the start. The bulk of the people were giving 3 weeks as the starting point. 4 weeks vacation on average was achieved at 5 years, 5 weeks at 13 years, 6 weeks at 21 years, and we never had a 7-week vacation amount in our policy, but on average that was coming at 23 years. From the best policies, in terms of entitlement for the employees, our neighbors in Lanark give 4 weeks at year number 2. So there are, direct competitors, and they're giving right at 2 years. Halliburton, Hastings, and Lennox, all at 3 years, are getting 4 weeks. So ours at 5 is the average across all 13. Prince Edward County, by the 15th year, they're at 7 weeks already. So theirs is significantly, front-loaded compared to the rest of them. So our average here that we've chosen as the baseline for ours is, it's not going to put us at like Jeff said, at the forefront, but it's going to at least make us comparable and on average.
Thank you for that. Is it going to be retroactive? Because I'm looking over there at Gwen, and she's like, well, I was employed like a few months before January 2024.
So Chair, through you, so the actual policy states in it about sort of how the retroactivity will work. Okay. And essentially, because we're in the middle of a vacation year, not to confuse things, on January 1st of 2024, these new rates would come into effect for existing employees.
I just wanted to, she was looking at me, so I thought I'd just throw it out there so it's in the public. Go ahead, member from Killaloe, Haggerty, and Richards.
Thank you, Chair. We're currently looking at our policy as well, and we've come to the grips of a good retention would be the increments to 5 to 12, because that's only a 7-year gap or jump, and then our second tier would be from 12 to 20, which would be an 8-year gap. That 1 year brings it down, so they say 7 years, and I'm going to get that extra week. It just, I think that's more incentive, and that's what we've decided in our group, that what we plan on doing. So.
Member from Abbotston Bromley, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that a pretty good balance was struck here on making changes, and that's not to say that it can be changed going forward. What I think is, so we talk about the 1 point so many days, and then throughout it's talking about the weeks, and ultimately, I think the vast majority of individuals look at their allotment of days, and so long as there's a statutory holiday in there, it's more weeks than we're suggesting. So I think that we're already at that rate. I've always thought that, even as the policy is written, ultimately, if I were an employee that was towards the end of the year, I would want to make sure I damn well got started on the 28th of December, because I was going to be completing my year in the following year. So I was going to get a day's vacation perhaps in that year, and then I was a week later going to get 3 weeks. So there was always an inequity because everybody that starts, whenever they start in a year, that the next year they are going to complete their first full year. That's the year that they will complete it. So it all does go back to January 1. So I think we might as well just bite the bullet, and all new hires are getting it at that rate. Likewise, I think that the adjustments on those larger increments, I think that there's 4 in there. I don't know what they were. They seem kind of unduly complex, the 1 day. I'm not sure that, quite frankly, I know that we wish to retain long-term employees, but I think that trend, as represented on the south side, west side of the room right now, I think that that level of commitment to a single employer is probably waning in any event, because it seems unduly complex to be continually changing that by 1 day over that period. However, I mean, it's not a concern to me that it is there. It just seems unduly complicated.
And I mean, we all know right now, hiring, people are looking for work-life balance, whether it be hybrid working or vacation. It's the trend now. So if there's nothing further, I will call for the vote. All in favor? Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. We have to do the incentive part. Sorry, Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. Part B is a policy very specific to the challenges that are currently taking place within our long-term care sector. And those challenges are actually very specific to one of our 2 long-term care facilities. That's Bonnechere Manor. You will note, if you had an opportunity to look at the Treasurer's report to the June 30th position, that we have spent almost $1 million on staffing agencies and accommodation for contract employees, because we cannot staff Bonnechere Manor to the required standard, to our base level of staffing, and we have been in that position for some time. Part of it is certainly as a result of the pandemic, seemed to be a bit of a change point, but Bonnechere Manor prior to the pandemic was having challenges fairly routinely in certain positions and being able to fully staff those positions. That challenge led to the creation of the Algonquin College PSW program being delivered right within our facility in one of our attempts to be able to train our own staff and have them work at that facility and to take those positions that were left open and vacant. So what we are attempting to do with this policy is to offer an incentive. It's a trial period. You'll see September through December, where we plan to really launch some very aggressive marketing and advertising to those individuals who are in the position of looking for employment with us, and specific to Bonnechere Manor, and specific to very crucial positions within that environment. And so that policy, which is we're calling it a return of service incentive program. Our intention is to have that fully funded through our federal Safe Start grant that we received through the federal government at the beginning of the pandemic, very specific to recruiting and retention and pandemic impact mitigation. And so that certainly falls into this category. We have some funds available within that initial allocation of funds. And so we're doing everything we can to attempt to put people in positions in Bonnechere Manor to alleviate our dependency on the staffing agencies. This committee will be aware of the fact that we also have a contract currently with an international recruiter, and those efforts are going on simultaneously, what we're attempting to do here through this incentive program. But we are throwing everything that we can think of at recruiting for Bonnechere Manor in those direct nursing care positions in an attempt to stabilize that staffing level at Bonnechere Manor. And so, Madam Chair, that policy is very specific and for that period of time.
My only question is, do you think that's long enough? That's September 1st to December 31st? I would say that even if we vote on it today, that if we find that all of a sudden there's an uptake at the end of December, perhaps we extend it at that point, but that's a tomorrow problem. Any comments, questions, concerns on this program for Bon Cher Manor? The member for Mammoth Bromley, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to Mr. Foss. Mr. Foss ultimately did speak to it, that we've had to be very innovative within long-term care. This is a pre-existing condition that HHR staffing, and it is most acutely at the manor. So there is all of those steps that have been undertaken to mitigate or help us out to continue to meet our staffing requirements. I think, as indicated yesterday in Mr. Blackmore's report, certainly on page 34, which is the Treasurer's report, commences for the Bon Cher Manor nursing services, the second item. And if you see the substantial I'll call it surplus. It's actually not a benefit, but underspend on direct salaries and direct benefits to staff. You will see it is substantially underspent. And then if you look towards the bottom of that same section at purchase services and purchase services accommodation, you will see the corresponding item wherein purchase services year to date is at $872,000 with an annual budget of $2,400. So I think that certainly in stark relief is identifying the challenge that we continue to feel, most particularly at Bon Cher Manor.
Well, I look forward to seeing how this works out. The member from North Elgin-Wilberforce, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to Mr. Blackmore. I'm just curious, because this situation is critical and acute, is it also resulting in more employees leaving Bon Cher Manor just because of the situation that exists?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, I would say that the retention is not where we want it to be, obviously, but I think this is as much a matter of the goal we're setting is this 4 hours of resident care per day, and we're certainly not achieving that. We're sitting at about 3.04 right now at the manor. But historically, the staffing levels are, with the advent of staffing agencies, we're basically where we've been in terms of baseline. But the goal is to get to that 4 hours of resident care per day, and that's the dollars that Councillor Donahue had just pointed out to us. That's what's remaining to be spent, because we're not showing that incremental increase required to be able to claim those funds. HHR across the board is a challenge, but it has been more acute at the manor over these past years, even pre-pandemic, and for what we can only equate to is what we think is geographical, given the competition with the City of Ottawa and its location, away from, like Pembroke. We're close to the base. We enjoy that. The college being right on site as well, even though we did attempt to have our own classroom, which we did, and did graduate students, from PSW students from the manor. So in a nutshell, it's been a chronic problem, exacerbated by COVID, and I'd say we're basically at our baseline staffing levels at the moment.
Thank you. Anything further? The member from Amherst Bromley, please.
Yeah, just to pick up on that point, I think that what Councillor Rose was talking about is often with wildfires, they create their own winds, which then prompt larger wildfire. And I think that was what he was questioning, is the situation that is being experienced, the HHR issues, the health human resource issues, if that unto itself is impacting the staffing. And I think that It's safe to say no. What I would suggest, and Mr. Blackmore is absolutely spot on with respect to the comparison between Miramichi Lodge and Bunisher Manor. However, I think one has to look more broadly. The health, I think that every economic sector that exists is having HR issues. I think it is most acute within health human resources. All one needs to do is open the paper routinely and stick a pin in a map of where in Ontario an ER is closing for a shift for a weekend. This is not something that is contained to Bunisher Manor. I think that it is probably the opposite. Is there is a great deal of satisfaction that we have had a stable workforce at the lodge that may be more the outlier than the norm. So I would suggest that the situation that is being experienced at the manor is not unto itself driving the experience that is happening at the manor.
All right then, if there's nothing further, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Excellent, that carries. And let's move on to number 9, everybody's favorite subject, County Road 512.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, with respect to County Road 512, perhaps I'd read this recommendation that the Finance and Administration Committee recommends to County Council that a bylaw to authorize the submission of an application to Ontario Infrastructure and Lands Corporation for financing of capital work for Mount Road reconstruction to authorize temporary borrowing from OILC to meet expenditures in connection with such capital work and to authorize long-term borrowing for such capital work through the issue of debentures to OILC.
I'll ask for a mover and seconder, please. Moved by the member from Alveston Bromley, seconded by the member from Brunel, Lindock, and Raglan. She's practically waving now. I'm not sure that people need background. You can all see the background that we're substantially over budget on this particular project, but I will say, thank goodness it was finally started on Monday. Member from Alveston Bromley, please.
I think perhaps, Madam Chair, for you and the member from Brunel, Lindock, Raglan, while it is not precisely pecuniary, it is pecuniary adjacent. So I think that it is perhaps of most consequence to your two communities in this event, but I am pleased nonetheless. This has been an odyssey. The thing that I just wish to comment on, and I am actually pleased that the debenture, so if I'm understanding this correctly, ultimately this will not be debentured until such time as the project is completed at some point in 2024. Presumably it is in the latter period, at the least late Q3, if not Q4, before this would be anticipated. And I say this because we are at, in my estimation, we're at peak interest costs, servicing costs right now. In fact, I think that perhaps this should be put into that cabinet out there. We're in a very strange situation right now where we can borrow construction loan, and I get that this is variable rate that has been printed here, but at 5.42% from a construction loan, we're actually 28 basis points below what we're earning on our RAG holdings. They're currently at 5.7%. So there is perhaps we are in an adjacent universe, if string theory is correct, where now we are earning more interest than we would be paying. So I am pleased in this strange new dynamic that at the very least we're looking at perhaps Q4 of 2024, because I do have some hope that we are going to see a diminishment in the Bank of Canada prime, which will ultimately cascade throughout the lending world. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And it's not pecuniary for me. My portion's already been done. As people noted on the road tour, apparently, that you get just past my house and then it's a disaster. So anything further? I'll call the question. All in favor? Excellent. And mover and seconder for the Corporate Service Department report as a whole. Moved by the member from Killoughby, Hegarty and Richards, second by the member from Laurentian Hills. Anything further? All in favor? Thank you. Is there any new business? I see none. We have no closed meeting. We're good?
Yes, there is no closed meeting.
Thank you. So our next meeting is Thursday, September 14th, and I will ask for an adjournment, please. Moved by the member from North Algona Wilberforce, second by the member from Broodnell, Lindock, and Raglan. All in favor? We are adjourned. Take us out, Tina.